Hello and welcome to Over the Board Chess Action. And after a long break, offline chess is returning as lockdowns are eased. The pandemic situation is slowly coming down in certain parts as the world was gripping under the pandemic for more than 6 months now. And as a relief to the sporting world, it seems like we are in for a couple of weeks of lively chess action over the board as Altibox Elite tournament in Stavanger kicked off. So in today's video, let's have a look at an interesting game played between Jan Christoph Duda and Alireja Firouzja. Somehow I like this game rather than other games being played. So let's have a look at the game. So playing with the white pieces, Duda goes for e4 and c6 replies Firouzja, going after the Caro-Kann defense. d4, d5, knight to c3, d takes e4 and knight takes e4. Now it's the main line of the Caro-Kann defense. Now bishop to f5. With this, it turns out to be the classical variation, attacking the knight on e4. So white plays knight to g3, attacking the bishop. Now bishop goes to g6 and h4 with the idea of playing h5. So h6 replies Firouzja and knight to f3, continuing with the development of pieces. Knight to d7 and h5. Now here it turns out to be the Spassky variation. Now bishop goes to h7 and bishop to d3, offering the exchange of the light square bishop. Now bishop takes d3 and queen takes d3, and now e6, preparing to open up the pieces on the king side. So now bishop to d2 and knight g to f6, and here Duda goes for the queenside castling and bishop to e7. With this move, the game turns out to be the low-brown system, and black preparing for castling on the king side. So king to b1, further protecting the king, and here Firouzja castles on the king side. And now knight to e4 with an idea of exchanging the knight, and so here Firouzja plays a c5 and bishop to e3. Now knight takes e4 and queen takes e4. Now queen into e4. So here Firouzja gives up, sacrifices a pawn, and here Firouzja plays a knight to f6, sacrificing the b7 pawn. So Duda accepts the offer and he plays queen into b7, and now knight to d5 with an idea of playing a knight to c3 after a rook to b8 and win a rook. So Duda plays queen to a6, and now as expected a rook to b8 with the idea of playing knight to c3 check and win the rook. So Duda plays a bishop to d2, protecting the c3 square, and now c takes d4 and knight takes d4, and now bishop to f6, attacking the knight on d4. Now knight goes to b3 and queen to c7 with the idea of launching an attack and put pressure on the c2 pawn. So now rook h to e1 and rook f to c8, attacking the pawn on c2. So here Duda plays rook to c1, supporting the pawn, and now knight to b6 with the idea of playing a knight to knight to c4, and here Duda plays rook to e4 and knight to c4, and here Duda plays bishop to f4, attacking the queen, and the queen is pinned. So here Firouzja goes for the exchange of queens by playing queen to b6, and Duda accept the offer by playing queen into b6 and rook into b6, and now bishop to e3 attacking the rook on b6, and now rook to b4 with the idea of playing knight to 3 and check and win the rook on e4. So Duda plays f3 supporting the rook on e4, and now a4 a5, and here Duda decide to trade a rook for a knight, and he plays a rook into c4 and rook c to c4, rook c into c4, and bishop to d2 attacking the rook on b4, and now rook to b5, and bishop takes the a5 pawn by playing bishop into a5 and rook into h5. Here Firouzja also win a pawn, and now rook to g1 and rook to b5, now bishop to d2 and h5, and c3 plays Duda and g5. Here Firouzja is planning for an attack. Here Firouzja is trying to promote his pawns on the king side, and now king to c2, and now g4 and knight to c1 and g3, and now b3 attacking the rook on c4, and now rook goes to c8 and a4 attacking the rook on b5. Now rook goes to f5, so knight to e2 attacking the pawn on g3. So here h4 plays Firouzja coming in rescue to the pawn, and now c4. Here Duda also trying to promote his queenside pawns. e5 plays Firouzja and bishop to e3, and now bishop to g5. Here Firouzja offers the dark square bishop trade, and Duda readily accepts it by taking the bishop on g5 and a rook into g5. Now rook to h1 attacking the pawn on h4, and rook to h5 comes in support of the h4 pawn, and here clearly Firouzja is trying to push the pawns and launch a very strong attack. So king to c3 and f5, but the position clearly favors Firouzja, and now b4 and f4, now a5, both the players trying to promote their pawns, and now h3, now g takes h3 and e4, now f takes e4 and g2 attacking the rook. So rook plays g1 and rook into h3 with a check. So king goes to d4 and f3. After f3, Duda plays c5 and king to f7. Now knight to f4 attacking the rook, and here Firouzja plays f2, and it was on this move, on move 52, that Duda resigned the game. Earlier Firouzja offered a draw which Duda declined, but here that proved counterproductive. Even if the knight takes the rook on h3, that is of no use because black's pawn can queen by playing f1. If rook into f1, then g into f1 is losing for white. It was a brilliant victory for Firouzja in the opening game. So stay tuned for more action from the Altibox Norway Chess Championship, and hope you all enjoyed the video, and thank you.